Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Martha Roth. I'm the Dean of the Division of Humanities at the University of Chicago, and it is my pleasure tonight to welcome you to the first Chicago Humanities Forum of the Franke Forum of the new year, sponsored by the Franke Institute for the Humanities and by the Division of the Humanities at the University of Chicago. I know you are all looking forward to Wendy Doniger's talk this evening, as am I. I have known Wendy for a little over 30 years, I think now, and I have seen her draw inspiration from a wide variety of sources, fairy tales, art, mythology, monuments, politics, sexual and otherwise. But tonight I think there's a new inspiration, and that's pain. Wendy seems to have written her talk while undergoing surgery. And preparing and the after effects of surgery. So this should be interesting. Please make notes on your calendar. Our next forum will be on Wednesday, May 5th. The talk will be featuring philosophy professor Joseph Stern. The title of his talk is The Unbinding of Isaac, Maimonides on Genesis 22. Joseph is the director of our newly created Chicago Center for Jewish Studies, and his talk promises to be enlightening, as I'm sure will be this evening's talk. And after the talk, we'll take some questions, and then please join Wendy and your friends for beverages after the speech. Tonight now, I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Ulrika Stark, Wendy's colleague in the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations, who will make the formal introduction of Wendy Doniger. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Exactingly learned, strikingly original, exuberantly humane, and refreshingly witty. These are words used by a critic to describe the extraordinary scholarship of Wendy Doniger, Mircea Eliade Professor, Distinguished Service Professor of the History of Religions, whom it is my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight. I could not think of a better way to describe not only the scholar, but also the person. Wendy Doniger holds 2 doctorates from Harvard and Oxford in Sanskrit, Indian, and Oriental Studies. She joined the University of Chicago as professor in the Divinity School in 1978 and has since gracefully worn many academic hats, dividing her time between the Divinity School, the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations, the Committee on Social Thought, and the college. Wendy Doniger's work on Hinduism and mythology has earned her many awards and distinctions. She was a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, an elected member of the American Philosophical Society, and was awarded the Medal of the Collège de France. Her book, The Betrick, Tales of Sex and Masquerade, received a prize from the British Academy in 2002 for being the best book about English literature written by a woman. She is also the recipient of the American Academy of Religion's 2008 Martin E. Marty Award for the Public Understanding of Religion. This award goes to those whose work speaks not just to scholars, but also more broadly to the public. Last year, she received an honorary degree from Harvard, the most recent in an impressive list of honorary doctorates. Wendy Doniger has been called the greatest living mythologist. This is not surprising in view of her prolific career. She is the author, translator, and editor of some 30 books and countless scholarly articles. Her cross-cultural interests include death, dreams, evil, horses, sex, androgynes, and women. I won't even start to give you titles. Let me just say that her vast scholarly output comprises classic textbooks read by students of Hinduism around the globe and widely acclaimed translations of Sanskrit texts, including the first modern English translation, together with psychoanalyst Sudhir Kakar, of the Kama Sutra, which prompted a flurry of reviews with such inspired titles as New Kama Sutra Puts Women on Top. A third category of books, written by the mythologist in her, explores myth, sex, and gender in comparative perspective, taking us on a dazzling interpretive tour around the world, from Vedic India to ancient Greece to Victorian England, and from the Hebrew Bible to Shakespearean drama to American cinema. Wendy Doniger's meticulous research evinces both depth and stunning cross-cultural breadth. As a scholar, she has continuously sought to advance the dialogue between cultures. She remains a fierce and intrepid advocate of the complexity and plurality of Hindu culture, whose reading of textual traditions has always foregrounded the multiplicity of views and perspectives. This is especially true for her most recent book, The Hindus, An Alternative History, published last year by Penguin, which once again marks her out as one of the foremost Western interpreters of Hinduism. This magnum opus has received critical acclaim well beyond the academic world and is already making history. Just last week, The Hindus was chosen as a finalist in the nonfiction category in the 2009 book contest of the National Book Critics Circle. Wendy Doniger is much more than the brilliant author of a daunting number of scholarly publications. She's also a public intellectual, a blogger, a novelist in the making, and most of all, a passionate teacher and mentor to a great number of Chicago students. With her erudition, dedication, and wit, she continues to be an inspiration to those who study with her and those who work with her. In academic, as in real life, Wendy finally is a person with a deep passion for both humans and animals, whose company she enjoys in equal measure. She has given us new insights into the role of horses, dogs, and other four-legged creatures in Indian culture and beyond. Today, she will enlighten us on, among many other things, the salvific power of fish. Her talk tonight is entitled Faking It, Circular Jewelry, and Resourceful Women. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wendy Doniger, a genuine, radiant jewel in the academic world.
Thank you, Ulrika. I'm bound to disappoint you after that. That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much, Ulrika. And thank you all for coming out this evening to hear me. This is a piece of a book in the making, and I look forward to, especially to the question and answer period for input from all of you. Why are sex and jewelry so often connected? More precisely, what is it that connects an anxiety about the authenticity of fake jewelry with an anxiety about the authenticity of fake women? That is to say, untrue, unfaithful, promiscuous women. Why are diamonds a girl's best friend? These are some of the questions that have inspired me to work on a book about narratives of circular jewelry and deceitful women. And I want to share some preliminary ideas about these narratives with you this evening. The sexual symbolism of circular jewelry, particularly finger rings, is not subtle. The ring's obvious sexual meanings may have been suggested by the analogy between putting your finger through a ring and putting one sexual organ into another. Since Shakespeare's time, ring has been a slang term for the female genitalia, as is the French term jewel, bijou, a term which in English is generally assigned to the male genitalia, as in the expression, the family jewels. So this gesture, is a pretty crude but easily decipherable international symbol. And it takes no Claude Lévi-Strauss come from the grave to translate nature into culture in the gesture that accompanies the phrase, "With this ring I thee wed." There's some things PowerPoint can't do. Freud, always eager to connect the dots, retold a European folk tale, first known from François Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel in 1553, which Freud and his colleague D.E. Oppenheim called the ring of fidelity, and they retold it like this. A man jealous of his wife had a dream in which a demon appeared. The demon promised him a foolproof way of ensuring his wife's remaining faithful. Take this ring, instructed the demon, and wear it on your finger with care. As long as you wear it, your wife cannot lie with any other man without your knowledge. As the man awoke, excited with joy, he felt that he was pushing his finger into the vulva of his wife. The power of the ring is projected, as Freud taught us to see. Within the dream, the man puts the ring not on his wife's finger, as you might expect if it were to function as a fetter, a chain, but on his own finger in a replication of the sexual act. Outside the dream, however, his wife, or the part of her that concerns him, the part that he wants to control, is the ring, which therefore belongs on his finger, not on hers. The identification of women with their jewelry has historical and sociological implications, too. For most of recorded history, jewelry has been the only property that women have been allowed to own. And jewelry has, moreover, all the advantages of what Mr. Wemmick in Charles Dickens' Great Expectations called portable property. If a woman wanted to leave her husband, few legal or economic sanctions were available to her, but she was usually allowed to keep the jewelry that she brought into the marriage, her dowry, and sometimes also the jewelry that she had been given in the course of it, and it was this that bought her some degree of independence. In our day, the patterns that link jewelry and the sexuality of women are far more intricate, but a ruthless structuralist can group them into two contrasting paradigms. The Doris Day scenario of legitimation, get the gold wedding ring before you go to bed with him, and the Marilyn Monroe scenario of illegitimation, get the diamond bracelet before you go to bed with him. These two paradigms have different historical trajectories, one from the regulation of marriage by religion, and the other from the survival strategies of women outside the confines of religion. The tension between these paradigms is what drives the narrative. This evening I want to consider four rather different stories involving women and circular jewelry, each adding a new level of insight to the human wisdom embedded in this wide cross-cultural narrative tradition. The first is the story of Tamar and Judah from the Hebrew Bible. The second is the story of Shakuntala and the Ring of Recognition from ancient India. The third is from the hagiography of Saint Kentigern of Glasgow in the 6th century CE. And the fourth is a short story about anti-Semitism, among other things, by W. Somerset Maugham. So, the first story, which has a very long shelf life and is widely distributed throughout Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, is known to folklorists as the clever wife or the clever wench. Stith Thompson, who was the Linnaeus of folklore, whose multi-volume index to all the themes in folklore is a kind of cross between the periodic tables and the Dewey Decimal System, gives it the evocative title of AT 891D, subtitled The Rejected Wife as Lover. We might define the skeletal plot of the tale of the clever wife as the story of a wife who manages, by disguising herself as someone else, to get pregnant by a husband who, A, refuses to consummate his marriage, B, challenges her to get pregnant by him, C, denies that her child when she gets, thank you, Martha, it's been doing this all day. Thank you very much, Martha. C, denies that her child when she gets pregnant is his, and D, is forced by the recognition of a ring to acknowledge the truth. In most variants of the story, the husband also challenged his wife to get his ring, though he swears he'll never take it off. She succeeds by tricking him into bed when she masquerades as another woman and insists on having his ring before she will submit to him. When the legitimacy of her son is called into question, she produces the ring and the man acknowledges the child as his. The best-known example of the clever wife in English literature is Shakespeare's All's Well That Ends Well, which can be traced back through French variants to a story in Boccaccio's Decameron. But Boccaccio didn't make up the story. It can be traced further back to Arabic variants carried to Europe with Islam, and behind those Arabic variants to a tale composed in Sanskrit, language of ancient India, in Kashmir in the 10th century CE. Some elements of the story of the clever wife, the masquerade, and the ring appear in the narrative of Tamar and Judah in Genesis 38, the 8th century BCE. The central incident could be summarized thus. Tamar married two of Judah's sons, but they died. Judah then promised her that she could marry his third son, Shelah, when he grew up, but Shelah grew up and did not marry Tamar. Sometime later, Judah's wife died, and then Tamar took off her widow's garments, covered her face with a veil, and sat by the road where Judah saw her and took her for a harlot because she had covered her face. He gave her his seal, that is his seal ring, his cord and staff, as temporary pledges to be redeemed, and he lay with her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up, went away, took off her veil, put on her widow's garments, and he couldn't find her to redeem his pledges. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot, and what is more, she's with child by harlotry. And Judah said, take her out and let her be burned. As she was being taken out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom this seal and cord and staff belong, by him am I with child. Judah recognized, doesn't say what he recognized. I think he recognized the ring. They often insert the word her in translations, but the Hebrew doesn't say that. It just says Judah recognized and said, she is more in the right than I, for I did not give her to my son, Shelah. Tamar becomes pregnant as a result of an illicit sexual encounter, and later, when accused of adultery, identifies the father by the ring. Tamar departs from the pattern of the clever wife on two related points. The man she sleeps with is not her husband, and he does not therefore challenge her to become pregnant. But the basic agenda of the book of Genesis, and this chapter in particular, is to continue the line of descent of the Israelites. And like other clever wives, Tamar is determined to become pregnant by hook or by crook. Judah unknowingly accepts Tamar as a substitute for the prostitute who is substituting for Judah's dead wife, while Tamar knowingly accepts Judah as a substitute for Shelah. All in all, I think Tamar qualifies with the other clever wives, but the Hebrew Bible takes the story in different directions, deepening our understanding of the meaning of the theme and broadening our range of options for its implications in other aspects of human life. The biblical text regards the testimony of Judah's ring in Tamar's hands as definitive proof, but that testimony is challenged when the story is retold in the Testament of Judah, a 2nd century BCE text, which is narrated by Judah himself, who says that he was drunk when he slept with Tamar. He says, I went in unto her, and she conceived, and not knowing what she had done, I wanted to kill her, but she privately sent the pledge and put me to shame. The pledge is the ring. And when I called her, I heard also the secret words that I spoke in my drunkenness while sleeping with her. And I could not kill her, for it was from the Lord. But I said, perhaps she did it deceitfully, having received the pledge from another woman. Why not? The confrontation in the Bible is probably public, for it follows immediately upon Judah's statement to a group of accusers, whom he probably addresses when he refers to Tamar as she. She's probably not present. Yet Tamar may have sent him the signs privately. The testament of Judah, on the other hand, makes it entirely a private reckoning between a man and a woman. Judah is so drunk that he doesn't recognize Tamar when he sleeps with her, but later on he recognizes her, though he denies it publicly because, as he confesses, I thought that nobody knew that I had gone in unto her. At first, the ring forces his hand, but then he suggests that she might have gotten the pledges and presumably the private words that he spoke in pillow talk from another treacherous and colluding woman. In other words, it doesn't mean that he slept with her, that she got his ring. It's not proof. This perfectly logical, commonsensical argument, although in this case a lie, because she did get it herself, seems not to have occurred to Judah in other texts, including the Hebrew Bible. Even here, in the end, he confesses of his own accord, and the story ends the same way it does in the Bible. Rings, particularly signet rings, are the personal emblem of the owner. The ring as a sign of identity may remind the wearer of the giver because it actually has something of him or her in it. It is truly a memento. A ring is a symbol of the personality, and to bestow a ring implies the surrender of one's being. In the Hebrew Bible, Judah's seal is a signet ring, which together with the cord and staff, according to Robert Alter, as the legal surrogate of the bearer, would have been a kind of ancient Near Eastern equivalent of all a person's major credit cards. The signet ring is an extension of the hand with its handwriting and later fingerprints. To lose your ring, therefore, is in a sense to lose your identity, and to find it again is to rediscover who you are. The many stories in which a magic ring is found in the belly of a fish are the mythical expression of a perfectly banal happening. Fishermen fish things up out of the deep. Indeed, there are a number, in fact, quite recent anecdotes in the New York Times in recent years in the Ripley's Believe It or Not genre, testifying to the fact that fish really do swallow rings, though probably not the ring that you may have lost in the ocean. In this, all of the ring in fish stories are counterintuitive, promising a happy ending that could seldom have been the case in real life. But that way madness lies. The point of the story and the reason for its extraordinary popularity must be found elsewhere than in the actual habits of gold rings and fish. In one branch of the story, call it Type A, the ring is lost against the owner's will and is miraculously regained to the owner's relief and delight. King Solomon's ring was said to have been stolen and thrown into the sea, but later found in the stomach of a fish that was served at his table, a particularly appropriate fate for a ring that enabled the wearer to understand the language of animals, presumably including fish. This story and the many others like it generally regard as a benevolent miracle the return of the ring from the ocean, a place from which everything eventually returns, but you cannot expect any particular thing to return. In the other branch of this genre, call it Type B, the polar opposite of the story of Solomon, the ring is something that the owner would wish to destroy if possible, something that is thrown away but returns against the owner's wish. The defining ring of this type in European mythology is the ring of Polycrates, ruler of Samos, whose story the Greek historian Herodotus tells in the 5th century BCE. This is David Green's translation. Polycrates had extraordinary good fortune, but was advised to forestall the jealousy of the gods by taking what he valued most, and which when lost would cost him the most agony of soul, and casting it away where it would never come to the world of men again. Polycrates had a signet ring that he wore continually. It was bound in gold, its stone was an emerald, had been made by a great craftsman. Polycrates ordered a boat, went in it himself, and when he was far from his island, threw his ring into the sea. 5 or 6 days afterwards, a fisherman caught a fish so large and beautiful that he thought he should give it to the king. When the royal servants cut up the fish, they found in its belly Polycrates' signet ring. Polycrates realized that it was impossible for one man to deliver his fellow man from what is fated to happen to him. He knew he would not end well, and he didn't. So Polycrates is ambivalent. He's fond of his ring, so he both does and does not want to get it back, though his fear of the ring is his dominant emotion. The ring of Tolkien, which I will not discuss, is a ring of this kind that you want to get rid of. The entirely straightforward fact that you lose your official identification and hence your personal identity, your persona, if you lose your ring or nowadays your credit cards, what we now call identity theft, leads to the quasi-magical idea of losing your memory of who you are when you lose your ring, or your memory of your connection with a lover when you lose the ring that was a gift from that lover and always reminded you of him or her. And when you find your ring, you remember again. This is a third type of ring, ring C, type C, the magic ring of memory and forgetfulness. The ancient Indian story of Shakuntala combines the ring in the fish story type A, where you want to get it back, with type C, the magic ring of memory and forgetfulness. The story is told in the Mahabharata, the great Sanskrit epic composed between about 300 BCE and 300 CE. It's an enormous work. It took hundreds of years to put it together. King Dushyanta comes to a hermitage where he meets a beautiful young woman named Shakuntala. He persuades her to marry him by the rite of private mutual desire. It's called the Gandharva ritual. The Gandharvas, who were kind of like centaurs, are the only witnesses. It's just you and her. But she makes him promise that if she bears him a son, the boy will become king. These clever wives are always concerned about the children. Then he leaves, promising to send for her. Shakuntala gives birth to a boy, and when he's 6 years old, she brings him to court, saying to Dushyanta, "This is your son. Remember the promise you made when we lay together long ago, 6 years." When the king hears her words, he remembers perfectly well, but he says, "I don't remember. Whose woman are you? I don't remember ever having had anything to do with you." He says a lot more, too. He says, "You slut." She argues with him at some length, but he insists that he does not know her, and she leaves. At that moment, a disembodied voice from the sky says, "Support your son and do not reject Shakuntala." Then Dushyanta says to his courtiers, "I knew all of this perfectly well. I knew all along. I knew he was my own son. But if I had accepted him as my own son just from her words, there would have been doubt among the people." Sure. Then he accepts his son, forgives Shakuntala for the harsh words she had spoken to him in her anger. Dushyanta does not want to remember either Shakuntala or his awkward promise about the succession. No other explanation is given for his decision to lie to her. But there's a historical development in the textual history of this story, which was retold several times, most famously in a Sanskrit play by the poet Kalidasa in the 4th century CE, right after the end of the period in which the Mahabharata was put together. Both Indians and Europeans have often regarded this play as the great masterpiece of classical Indian literature. It was one of the first texts translated into English in 1789. It was the very first text, wasn't it? It was the very first text translated into English by the British. And it inspired a famous poem by Goethe, "When I say Shakuntala, I say everything." Kalidasa enjoyed the patronage of the Gupta dynasty in the 4th century, who traced their lineage back to the child of Shakuntala and Dushyanta, a child named Bharata, a name which is the source of the word used to describe India in many North Indian languages to this day. So he's the king of India. Kalidasa had his work cut out for him to transform Bharata's father, Dushyanta, from a lying cad to a sympathetic lover, and he fell back upon the tried and true device of the magic ring of memory and the curse of forgetfulness. For the magic ring is one of those recycled mythic themes always available to storytellers that Claude Lévi-Strauss likened to the rags and bones that the French handyman, the bricoleur, uses to make new things out of broken pieces of old. These scraps are known to the audiences as well as to the storytellers. So the audience has an expectation of what the story should say, and the storyteller fulfills that expectation. There's no shock, there's no surprise ending. The audience takes pleasure in predicting what will happen and satisfaction in seeing it happen rather than being surprised. In Kalidasa's retelling of the story of Shakuntala, after Dushyanta sleeps with Shakuntala, he offers her his signet ring with his name engraved on it. He places his ring on her finger as he leaves to return to court, telling her to count off one day for each letter of his name, Dushyanta, and at the end he will send for her. An angry sage curses her to be forgotten by the man she loves until he sees some ornament as a token of recognition. And so Shakuntala loses the ring, and the king does not recognize her really and truly when she appears in court, pregnant. She's pregnant here. She doesn't have the 6-year-old son with her. It changes things. She runs away, and he does nothing until one day, years later, a fisherman brings him a fish in which he finds his ring, and he remembers her. He finds her and his son, now a young boy, and they are happily reunited. This fishy story gets Kalidasa out of what subsequent Indian scholars recognized as a true moral dilemma. The curse is very convenient and rather suspicious as an excuse. And indeed, when the curse occurs in the court, the ladies in the court, who are very cynical, remark to the king, such a passion should not need a token of remembrance or recognition. The king's reply, so let me blame the ring, is about as close as an admission of guilt as that sort of ruler, indeed that sort of man, will ever get. India and the rest of the world continue to generate stories in which rings, rather than kings, took the burden of guilt for seducing and abandoning women. There's one more version of the story, a Buddhist text, which tells of Shakuntala, without mentioning her name, tells the same story, and introduces into the Kalidasa version, where there was a ring, common sense. King Brahmadatta of Benares was wandering in his pleasure groves when he saw a woman and fell in love with her. He seduced her, and she conceived a child who was the future Buddha, the Bodhisattva, the boy who was going to grow up to be the Buddha. He gave her the signet, well, he's going to be the Buddha in a later life. It's complicated, but he's the future Buddha. He gave her the signet ring from his finger and dismissed her with the words, if it is a girl, spend this ring on her nurture. If it's a boy, bring the ring and the child to me. She gave birth to a boy, and the children teased him, calling, no, father, no, father. He asked his mother about his father, and she told him what had happened. The whole story is then retold in the folktale. At his request, she took him to the palace and said, this is your son, sire. The king knew well enough that this was the truth. So here's the Mahabharata, the older version. But shame before all the court made him reply, he's no son of mine. But here is your signet ring, sire. You will return this. So the two versions come together. He gave her the ring. That's not my signet ring, he says. Then said the woman, sire, I have now no witness to prove my words except to appeal to truth. Wherefore, if you be the father of my child, I pray that he may stay in mid-air, but if not, may he fall to earth and be killed. So saying, she seized the future Buddha by the foot and threw him up in the air. The child, suspended in air, told the king he was his son. The king stretched out his hands and cried, come to me, my boy, no one but me shall rear and nurture you. 1,000 hands were stretched out to receive the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, but it was into the arms of the king and no other that he descended, seating himself on the king's lap. The king made him viceroy and made his mother queen consort. At the death of the king, his father, he came to the throne, and after ruling his realm righteously, passed away to fare according to his deserts. So this text invokes the common sense fact that jewelry doesn't actually prove anything at all unless other people acknowledge it. The story also recognizes the hard-headed value of a precious ring, a very early instance of the argument that diamonds are a girl's best friend. But it also introduces a gender bias. If the child's a boy, it's all very well and good to use the ring to secure his patrimony. But if it's a girl, you'd better use it for her dowry. Thus, the ring serves both as a proof of identity and as a kind of child support. These rational considerations lead us back into irrational religion, an act of truth reminiscent of the voice from the sky in that first version in the Mahabharata, a miracle, a suspension of the law of gravity which proves the identity of the child. The father here quite blithely accepts the possibility that the boy may crash and die. The mother has faith that since he really is the king's son, he'll be safe. This text spells out, as the Mahabharata does not, the king's total disregard for the child as well as for the mother. Let's move to Europe and to the 6th century CE. A ring in a fish plays the key role in the tale of a rigged ordeal, a faked ordeal of adultery, recorded in many versions in the hagiography of the Bishop of Kentigern Cathedral, later known as Saint Kentigern and popularly known as Mungo, the founder of the See of Glasgow. He died in 1603. The patron saint's index says this about the fish that appears on his coat of arms. The fish was one caught by St. Kentigern in the River Clyde. When it was slit open, a ring belonging to the queen was miraculously found inside it. The queen was suspected of intrigue by her husband, and it was said that she had left with his ring. She had asked St. Kentigern for help, and he found and restored the ring in this way to clear her name, end quote. In other tellings of this story, and there are many, it's sometimes said that the king himself, suspecting the queen of infidelity, had thrown the ring into the River Clyde and accused her of losing it. Other texts assume that she was in fact guilty and tell the story in more detail. The wife of King Roderick, who's named in this text, gave to her lover, a knight in her husband's court, the ring that the king had given her as a token of his great love for her. This was unwise. One day out hunting, as the king and his knight were resting on the banks of the River Clyde, the knight fell asleep and involuntarily extended his hand, and the king saw the ring on the knight's finger. They were both careless. Controlling with difficulty his first impulse, which was to kill the knight on the spot, he took the ring from the king's finger and threw it into the Clyde without waking him. Then he returned to the palace and asked the queen for her ring, for his ring. When she failed to produce it, he threw her into prison under sentence of death. She begged for 3 days' grace, and having in vain asked the knight for the ring, she sought the help of Bishop Kentigern. He knew or guessed it all. He had found the ring in the belly of a salmon. Now we have a salmon. We're in Scotland. In the belly of a salmon fished from the River Clyde. He sent the ring to the queen so that she might use it to vindicate herself. Roderick went down on his knees to ask her pardon for his suspicions and offered to punish those who had accused her. But she dissuaded him and went on to confess everything to the bishop, who had her spend the rest of her life in penance. You recognize Isolde and Lancelot and Guinevere, all this whole medieval tradition of adulterous queens. Tristan and Isolde. The husband's desire to kill the man who cuckolded him is deflected to the queen, who invokes a saintly bishop to deflect from her, in turn, the punishment for the adultery. Instead of killing her, the king subjects her to what is, in effect, an ordeal, very common in medieval texts. If you can find your lost ring, you must be innocent. She is not innocent, but is proved innocent by the phony ordeal. Once again, common sense rears its head. How, after all, can a ring prove that someone did or did not commit an act of sexual infidelity? In this case, it vindicates a guilty woman. This mockery of the ordeal may have inspired yet another version of the story about a woman who was neither guilty nor a queen. A woman lost her wedding ring in the River Clyde. Her husband imagined that she had given it to some lover and was violently jealous. The innocent woman threw herself at the feet of Bishop Kentigern, who was obviously specializing in this, and begged him to prove her fidelity. He prayed, and a salmon brought the lost ring back from the depths of the waters. In grateful memory of this deed, and here we get into fact, the city of Glasgow and several of its bishops have their arms inscribed with a salmon with a ring in its mouth. That is true. Although in this version of the story the woman is presumably innocent, the mere loss of the wedding ring is a cause for suspicion. Why didn't she take care of it? I gave it to her, says the husband. And she is saved only by the lucky advent of the salvific salmon. The ordeal of retrieving the ring in this corpus of stories may have been designed precisely to determine whether or not the person who had lost it was innocent of adultery. In its crudest form, the suspected cuckolder was thrown into the water to kill him if he were guilty, as Roderick wanted to kill his errant knight. Later, it was the woman accused of adultery who was to be killed in this way, thrown in the water. And there are other variants, I could keep you here all night, where they throw the woman into the water. Like witches, right? If they float, they're guilty, and if they sink, they're innocent, but they sank, right? Still later, the ordeal merely required that the ring be thrown into the water, and the suspect was forced to search for it, sometimes by being thrown into the water, himself or herself, in order to test him or her. In time, then, the punishment for adultery was displaced from the man to the woman and then to the ring. Finally, in a case of alleged adultery, a champion would defend a woman's name by an ordeal. Sometimes this defense was a formal combat, such as the ones in which Lancelot defended Guinevere when she was guilty of adultery. But sometimes it was the ordeal of retrieving the woman's lost ring from the bottom of the sea. Bishop Kentigern plays the role of that champion for the wife of King Roderick, and so his tale finds its place within the corpus of medieval courtly epics where notorious adulteresses like Guinevere find ways to prove their innocence, their non-existent innocence, by manipulating ordeals that depend upon miracles, sometimes the miracle of the ring in the fish. These texts express two different views of the resurgence of the past as it is symbolized by the ring retrieved by the fish. The first view, that the past, when retrieved, is harmful, something to be feared. That's the ring of Polycrates. The second, that it is beneficial, something to be desired. That's Shakuntala's ring and the rings of the Scottish adulteresses. In both branches of the story, Polycrates type and the Shakuntala type, the ring in the belly of the fish reminds us that we cannot escape our fate, whether we fear it or desire it. But in both cases, the ring that is symbolic of clouded memory is inevitably found because it is an integral part of the person who loses it. Sigmund Freud explored the strangled grip of the past in his theory of the return of the repressed, a concept that illuminates some parts of these many recurrent myths and explains one reason why these myths of rings in fish are all over the place. He spelled it out in Moses and Monotheism in 1939. We repress unconscious thoughts and or feelings that we find too painful, but this repression requires fairly heavy psychic maintenance, and the repressed thought may break out at a moment of psychic trauma. That's a very simplistic summary of a rather complicated theory. The formation of symptoms indicates the return of the repressed, which appears in a distorted form in those symptoms. And so in the stories, the ring, when we do get it back out of the water, the self that is retrieved from lost memory is not the same. It is undergone, like the submerged body of the drowned king imagined in The Tempest, a sea change into something rich and strange. Or as our colleague A.K. Ramanujan put it, writing about Shakuntala's ring many years ago, nothing is lost, only transformed. Repression is to some extent a bad thing. It causes guilt, neurosis, and so forth. And the retrieval of the repressed thought through dreams, or as Freud claims, psychoanalysis, may be therapeutic for the individual. That's the Shakuntala Sarun, when we get the memory back and everything's going to be fine. But the repression may be healthier for society in general. Some things are best forgotten. And even for the individual, the breakthrough of a repressed emotion may have tragic consequences, for its original force at the time of the trauma may be distorted and multiplied by the intensity built up through the years trapped in the deep waters of the unconscious. That's the Polycrates syndrome. When it comes back, you're in real trouble. The positive and negative aspects of this repression and the corresponding negative and positive aspects of its return are mythologized in the two forms of the tale of the ring retrieved by the fish. Now let's get to the modern period and consider fake jewelry. Well, I'll have about 5 minutes past 6, okay? Normally, fake diamonds pretend to be real. Guy de Maupassant, in his short story The Necklace in 1885, told of a woman named Mathilde who borrowed a diamond necklace from her rich friend, Madame Forestier, so that she could wear it to enhance and show off her beauty at a ball. She lost the necklace and purchased for 36,000 francs an identical replacement, which she returned to the owner without telling her of the substitution. Madame Forestier did not notice any difference. Mathilde ruined her beauty and her life by putting herself and her husband in hard labor for 10 years to repay the money they had to borrow to buy the replacement. Years later, Mathilde met Madame Forestier again and told her what she had done, whereupon Madame Forestier told her that the necklace she had borrowed was a fake, worth only 500 francs. Neither of the women could tell the difference between the real thing and the fake. Mathilde mistook the fake for real. Madame Forestier mistook the real for the fake. Real diamonds stood in for fakes that had stood in for real diamonds. Henry James changed the diamonds to pearls and added an important new dimension to the psychology of the woman wearing the real or fake necklace in his story written in 1899 entitled Paste, that is fake diamonds, in which a young man named Arthur, who inherits his father's estate, finds among his stepmother's fake jewels a necklace of enormous pearls that seem to be real. But Arthur insists, how could she ever have come by them? The assumption is that if the pearls were real, they must have been received for services rendered, sleeping with a rich man, and the woman therefore must have been false. Arthur refuses to admit, perhaps even to himself, that the pearls are real. W. Somerset's story, the last story I'll tell you, entitled Mr. Know-All, published in 1925, shares the assumption that underlies the James story. A married woman wearing genuine pearls pretends that they are fakes in order to conceal from her husband the fact that a wealthy lover had given them to her. But then Maugham introduces the expert, Mr. Know-All, an unpleasant Levantine, which is code word in English 1925 for a Jew, who pretends to be English. The narrator seems to be anti-Semitic. He regards the Levantine as a fake gentleman. But when Mr. Know-All reverses his first true judgment that the pearls are true pearls, he said, one thing I know pearls, those are real. The woman says, I assure you, sir, they are fakes. Later on, he reverses his true judgment and fakes an opinion that the pearls are fake, thereby simultaneously saving the woman's reputation and ruining his own. Know-All, he made a mistake. He didn't really know pearls after all. He behaves like a real gentleman. By saying falsely that the real pearls are false, he shows that he himself is as real as the pearls, whereas the woman was the fake. Maugham in 1943 wrote a satire on his own story and called this second story A String of Beads. A governess standing in at a dinner party for a fashionable woman who had canceled at the last minute was wearing a string of pearls that an expert at the dinner insisted was genuine, worth 50,000 pounds, though the governess strenuously insisted that she had paid only 15 shillings for it. Here the person telling the story, the narrator, remarks, "We all laughed. It was, of course, absurd. We've all heard of wives palming off on their husbands as false, a string of pearls that was real and expensive. That story is as old as the hills." So this is bricolage again. We know this story. We all laughed. As the narrator then, who is Maugham, to whom this man says this, continues, "Thank you," I said, thinking of a little narrative of my own. So this man is saying, you wrote a trite story. Eventually, the truth emerges. The governess had taken her own cheap pearls to be mended, and the jeweler had given her by mistake someone else's real pearls. The mistake is detected, the necklace is exchanged again, and the governess receives a reward that she uses to set herself up as a demi-mondaine in Paris. She was going to be getting jewelry from men now. As the governess had substituted for a real member of high society, so real pearls had substituted for her fakes. Mom makes fun of his own earlier story here in conscious self-parody, as well as a sophisticated awareness of the fact that if a story about fake jewelry is recycled like a piece of bricolage, it's likely to be taken as false, even if it's true. In this case, the woman really did have pearls that she thought were fake. Conclusion. What is the conceptual thread on which we can string all these gems of stories? There are several, of course, but one that I'd like to speak of tonight is surely the theme of faking it. The 19th and 20th century authors, de Maupassant, James, and Maugham, are concerned with the paradoxical judgment that the fake may be more valuable than the real, a theme that has also become quite trendy in 20th and 21st century postmodernism. But as in all of the tales we've considered, the protagonists of these stories are primarily concerned with the authenticity of the women, and therefore not so much with the genuineness of their jewelry as about its authenticity. That is what we would call its provenance, where it comes from. The big question in all cases is not, is the jewelry real, but how did the women get it? If we jump from the concerns of the people inside the stories, these women, to the concerns of the narrators, the male narrators, on the frames of the stories, we can see that another kind of faking it plays a central role, namely the faking done by the narrative theme itself, by the narrator's skill and the audience's collusion in maintaining the illusion that if you can get someone's ring, you can prove that they slept with you, or that they did not really abandon you, but were merely helplessly bewitched into temporarily forgetting you. To put it differently, the narrator uses the ring to obscure the fact that men were faking it when they said they had not slept with the women, or that they had forgotten that they had slept with the women. Here is where the cross-cultural distribution of this theme is so impressive. On the frame of the story, it shows us how widespread is the desire to believe that a little thing like a ring can bring justice to the asymmetrical power relations that have controlled female sexuality for most of human history. It shows us how widespread is the desire to project the responsibility for sexual rejection or betrayal onto an external force like a gold ring. Finally, it shows us how widespread is the desire of male narrators to fake it, to cast moral aspersions on one of the few sources of women's independence, their jewelry. Thank you.